In 1988, George was invited to have a collection of paintings at the Moscow Summit in Moscow, which was Reagan's last summit as president. And George took many of his original Cajun canvases along with President Reagan's portrait and decided to paint a companion piece of Mikhail Gorbachev. It's just a gesture of goodwill to the Russian people. He included the portrait of Gorbachev with his hand out, extending his hand in peace to the Russian people, as he liked to say that he was a man for his citizens. And when he hung the portrait, he was expecting a great response. Unfortunately, the KGB felt differently, pulled George aside, and started questioning him as to why he painted President Gorbachev as begging. George had to backtrack a little bit and explain the portrait. Then they said, well, they would really prefer if George could paint the portrait with President Gorbachev on a horse, because Reagan was on a horse. Of course, George responded that he didn't know President Gorbachev had a horse, so he didn't paint him on one. And then they replied they would really hope that President Reagan would give him a horse. George didn't really have anything to say about that they let him go, they took his passport, and they also confiscated the paintings. This was a real problem for George, and it made such a great story that all of the news media there from all across the world picked up on it, and he was the #1 AP news story for an entire week, which forced the Russians to eventually put the paintings back on the walls to avoid the bad press. And George was able to smuggle them out of the country in the beer cooler of Air Force Two. He's never returned to Russia, and he kept the portrait of President Gorbachev in his personal collection.